Well, anyway, maybe you've heard the story of the farmer who decided he wanted to sell his mule. So he put an ad in the paper and let people know what he was planning on doing there. And as a result, a farmer from another community saw it and was interested, so he came to check it out. Well, the two started having a conversation, and eventually got around to talking about the mule. And the prospective owner said, first of all, he said, so does your mule work pretty hard? And the farmer said, oh yeah, he'll put in an honest day's work for you. There's no doubt about that. I said, oh, well, does he obey every command you give him? Oh yeah, he does really good at that. Well, that sounds good. I said, well, would you mind if we hooked him up to the harness, so I can kind of see what he's going to do, if he's really going to perform the way you say he's going to perform? And yeah, no problem. Yeah, let's do that. So they hooked the mule up and harnessed him up, and the prospective owner took the reins and he says, "Giddy up!" The mule just stood there. So we tried a few other things, a couple different commands, and nothing. The mule just stood there, ignored him. The guy's like a little bit irritated. I thought you told me this mule obeys all the commands. Well, he does. Then the owner proceeded to walk over and he picks up a 2x4. He goes around, he goes to the front of the mule and just whacks him over the head with that 2x4 good and hard, and then he goes back and he says, okay, I'll try it now. Puzzled, he said, okay, so he tells the mule, "Giddy up." The mule takes right off. Then he tries another bunch of other commands. The mule does everything exactly what he told him to do. The guy goes, I just don't understand that. And the farmer goes, well, it's like I told you, he'll obey all your commands. The thing is, you just have to get his attention first. Now, though it certainly shouldn't be that way, I'm sorry to say that when it comes to how it works out with us and God, oftentimes, and I know particularly with me, that's kind of how it is. I don't always listen very well because God doesn't have my attention. Now, thankfully, God doesn't start out with the proverbial 2x4, oftentimes right off the bat. But he does do things to get our attention, does he not? He does many things to try to get our attention so that we will listen to him. And as Pastor Mark reminded us a couple weeks ago here, that was certainly the case with Moses. As we know, I think many of us know the story, God used a burning bush that never burned up to get Moses' attention. When Moses then went over to check it out, God spoke to him. He informed him that he had heard the cries of the Israelites, his people in Egypt, and he'd seen their plight. And he had a job for Moses. He had a job for Moses to go and to bring them out of Egypt, lead his people out of slavery. Of course, Moses responded in classic human style. He had all kinds of excuses. Oh, I'm a nobody, why? Pharaoh will never listen to me. What if the people don't believe that you sent me? I can't speak. I'm just not a talker. I can't get up in front of people. How am I supposed to do something like that? You just really need to send somebody else. Of course, naturally, God had a remedy for every one of Moses' excuses. God said, I'll go with you. You aren't going to go by yourself. He said, you afraid they won't believe me? Here, I'll tell you what my name is. You can give them my name. I'll even speak for you. I'll give you the words to speak. You don't have to worry about a thing. I'll take care of it. I'll even perform perform miracles through you. Take your staff, throw it on the ground, see, that's what I can do for you. I'll do all these things for you. You don't have to worry about it. I'll be with you. I'll take care of you when you go. Even when Moses still continued to balk after all that, God was ready for that as well. He said, okay, fine. Your brother, Aaron, is already on his way to meet you. Let him do the speaking for you, since you don't think you can talk well enough. There are never any surprises for God. You will never catch God off guard. He always knows what's going on. In fact, he even always knows what's going to happen. And I think this scenario with Moses is very apparent. He was already he was always a step ahead of Moses. Now, as we think about that, I suppose there are some who might consider that, the fact that God is always ahead of us, he always knows what's coming, they might consider that to be a negative thing. I mean, after all, if you don't want to do something that you're supposed to do, or maybe if you're going to do something that you're not supposed to do, or you're not going to do whatever I said. You got it. If that's the case, you probably don't really want God to know what's going on. But the thing is, he does. You cannot hide whatever's going on from God. He always knows what you're doing and what you're going to do in advance. I prefer to see that, though, as a positive thing. Because then we know that we are never alone. God is always with us. I don't care what we're facing. I don't care what kind of a difficult situation it might be. We can always turn to God for strength, for help, for encouragement. God is always there. And like I said, there's no surprises with God. He's aware of everything that's going on in your life. And believe me, he cares about you personally. And he wants you to do well. So it is a good thing that God knows everything that's going on. Well, we're going to continue today in Exodus, where Pastor Mark left off last Sunday. So this is actually going to be a rather long text here. So I'm going to split this up. I'm not going to read it all at one time. I would encourage you, actually, if you don't have a Bible with you, to get the Bible out so you can kind of keep track of where we're at here. But anyway, beginning with verse 18 there. And again, this is right after the conversation with God and Moses at the burning bush. And God told him, take your staff and go. And so this is what happened next. It says, then Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, let me go back to my own people in Egypt and see if any of them are still alive. And Jethro said, go, and I wish you well. You know, there are some passages in the Bible that I think are better understood if we have kind of a concept in our mind about the geographical layout of what's going on. And that's why oftentimes when I read the Bible, I like to have a map with me so I can see where things are at, they're talking about. And certainly this is one of those cases. So I'm going to have Bob throw a map up here for us so we can just get a in our visual minds. I'm one of those guys, I know GPS is a big thing these days, but I still like to have a map and see where I'm at and where I'm going and this and that. So anyway, what you have here, I can't leave my mic. If you notice on your right is Midian. It's on off to the right of, says the Red Sea there. That's actually the modern Gulf of Aqaba. And that circle there is Mount Sinai, or Horeb, where Moses met God. Now, keep going, and actually what this is the traditional route of how when the Israelites came out of Egypt. But anyway, if you keep going off to the left there and up and across, that gets into Goshen and Egypt and so on there. Now, here's the thing. The Red Sea there, which is now the current Gulf of Aqaba, it's not just a little narrow pond, okay? And it's deep, it's 6,000 feet deep. And it's at least 15 miles wide, okay? I point that out because, okay, Midian is down here on this side, which means for Moses to get to Mount Horeb, he had to go up and around. Now, even if they were on the north end of that channel there, we're talking about 100 miles distance there that he would have taken those sheep to get to Mount Horeb. And of course, for Aaron to come from Egypt, it's almost twice as far. I mean, we're talking 150, 200 miles probably. So anyway, I just wanted you to get a visual of what's going on here. So Moses got done talking with God at Mount Horeb, which is around the circle there, and he heads back to Midian. I tell you what, that's quite a long ways to take a bunch of sheep. But that's what he did. I mean, so he goes back. Yeah, you can, if you want to leave it up again, otherwise. Anyway, Moses, like I said, he had to travel quite a long ways. There again, that's just, I know it's hard for me to comprehend going that far with a bunch of sheep. So obviously he's been gone even from Midian for a while. But when we think about that, okay, he couldn't just, I forgot I'm talking to God, he couldn't just leave the sheep there and go on to eat. I suppose he could have, but had to take them back home. Plus he had a family back in Midian again. So he goes back. I don't think that's too surprising that he would turn around to go back. But what I want us to notice in the text is what Moses told Jethro once he got back to Midian. Now, what did God tell him he was supposed to do? He was supposed to go and bring God's people out of Egypt. But he gets back to Midian. It's not quite what he said. He didn't say, by the way, Jethro, when I had your sheep over there at the mountain of God, Horeb, I just happened to run into God, and he told me that I was supposed to go to Egypt and bring his people out. Do you mind if I go do that? Now, if you were Jethro, and Moses came and told you that, what would be your reaction? Really? You met God, and God told you to go to Egypt and bring God's people. Maybe that's why. We don't really know why Moses really wasn't totally forthcoming with what he'd been told to do, but for whatever reason, he did not tell Jethro the exact thing that he was doing. Instead, he said, hey, I really want to go back and see if any of my family is still alive. Jethro says, yeah, by all means, go right ahead. You have my blessing, go. Here's the point I want us to get from this. See, after Moses talked with God, he could have got this little prideful attitude. And he could have went back and he could have just told Jethro what he was going to do. You know what, God told me to go to Egypt, so I'm going off to Egypt. See ya. No. He didn't do that. Instead, he very humbly came back to Jethro and asked for his permission to go. See, when Moses left Egypt the first time and came to Midian, he was running for his life. And Jethro took him in, even took him into the family, gave him his daughter for his wife. Jethro had been very, very gracious to Moses. So rather than acting very arrogantly, Moses humbly respected Jethro and asked for his permission. Don't ever forget where you came from. And especially, do not disrespect those who have helped you get to where you are today. Let's move on. Next verse, verse 19. Let's move on to the next verse there, Bob. Thank you. Now the Lord said to Moses and Midian, go back to Egypt, for all the men who wanted to kill you are dead. So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and started back to Egypt. And he took the staff of God in his hand. The Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son. And I told you, let my son go so he may worship me. But you refuse to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son. It had been 40 years since Moses had been back to Egypt. Again, when he left because of fear for his life. He was fearing for his life because Pharaoh wanted to kill him. Now, I suspect there were probably a few times in those years that Moses had wondered if he could ever stop looking over his shoulder for fear that someone was still coming after him. Now, I realize he was hundreds of miles from home, hundreds of miles from Egypt, but still. I have an idea that was always on the back of his mind. And now God was telling him to go back to Egypt. You know, maybe that is one of the reasons why he was so hesitant. Why he had all kinds of excuses for not wanting to go back to Egypt. Why he wanted God to send someone else. And I suspect that may be the case. Because as these verses tell us here, God reassured him that it was now safe for him to go back. He said, everybody who's going to kill you is dead. Everybody that wants your life is gone. So there's no risk in that. It's safe now for you to go back. And as we think about that, regardless of the reason, up until this point, was Moses really being very obedient to what God had told him to do? It almost seems like he was still kind of dragging his feet a little bit. But God understood. Reminder of the goodness and the graciousness of God. He understood where Moses was coming from, and so he assured him that it was okay. He gave him the assurance that he needed, but also just so Moses could better fully understand what was expected of him, what he was getting himself into. God again reminded him of the instructions he had given him at the burning bush. Plus, he also filled in a few of the other details about what was going to happen here. God said, make sure you do everything and say everything that I told you to do, and everything that I told you to say. Do everything that I'm giving you the power to do. Say everything that I told you to tell them. In other words, do everything in obedience to what I said. Be obedient to what I've told you to do. I mean, that's the simple translation to that. That makes sense, I believe. But then God told Moses something that many people have struggled with for many years and still do struggle with. God said, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Does God harden people's hearts? You think? And if so, how does God harden people's heart? How does he do that? If he indeed does harden people's hearts, how that's something that people have been wrestling with, because why would God do something like that? Well, I want you to again, think about human nature just for a minute. Have you ever known someone who, if they're told to do something that they don't want to do, rather than obeying, they dig in their heels and resist? You ever known somebody like that? And then the more you push them, they just dig in a little deeper and resist a little more. You ever seen anybody like that? You know somebody? Are you like that? To be honest. It happens, right? God knew the nature of Pharaoh. He knew that generally speaking, Pharaoh was opposed to God. And God knew that Pharaoh was not going to do what God wanted to do. In fact, the more Moses pushed him, the deeper Pharaoh was going to dig in his heels and resist. Now here's the thing. Through that whole time, Pharaoh still had free will. You see, this is one of those cases where I think God's divine nature and man's free will collides head on. And we're not sure what to do with that. But we need to, there again, keep in mind, this whole time, Pharaoh had free will. Any time during that whole process, he could have said, you're right, just go. But he didn't. He chose to resist. That's how God knew that Pharaoh's heart would be hardened. God didn't just divinely harden his heart. Just through the process, God knew that his heart would be hardened. Hopefully you're not in it. Particularly when it comes to the things of God. That you will not resist and allow your heart to become hardened. Not a good thing to do that. Apparently, Moses was satisfied with what God had told him. Because the additional things that he told him were also that Pharaoh was not going to give in until God actually took Pharaoh's son. Then Pharaoh would finally relinquish and go, let them go. Moses, we're told, then steps out of obedience, packs up his things, his family, takes off on this long journey, 300 plus miles to Egypt. There again, that's a long ways to walk, leading a donkey. But yet he went out of obedience. Everything is good. Or is it? Moving on to verse 24. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me, she said. So the Lord let him alone. At that time she said bridegroom of blood, referring to circumcision. I mean, whoa. Let me get this straight, okay? God tells Moses to go to Egypt. Drags his feet, resists a little bit. Then finally, he starts to go. He gives in, says, okay, God, I'll do what you tell me to do. He starts to go, and God tries to kill him. What is that all about? Does that make any sense at all? What in the world do we have here? Basically, we have the proverbial 2x4. That's what this is. Thankfully, chapters here, you will see that Moses had a son in Midian named Gershom. But when he heads out to go back to Egypt, he packs up his sons, plural. Obviously, somewhere in there, Moses had another son. No, we're not told the reason. Apparently, he never circumcised him. Because we're told that Zipporah only circumcised one son. Now, your initial thought might be, well, that's surely not such a big deal that it would warrant God killing Moses just because he didn't circumcise his son. I mean, that can't hardly be right, can it? Moses may have been raised under Pharaoh's roof. But I will guarantee you, he was well educated in the laws of his people. And he knew the command that God gave to Abraham that all of his descendants were to be circumcised. It said apparently Gershom was, because Zipporah only circumcised one son. Now, I'm not going to get into the significance of the meaning today of that late bridegroom of blood which Zipporah gave to Moses. That's really not related to the main point I'm trying to make here today. I just want to point out that when she did that, God was satisfied with that act of obedience. Because again, it says he let Moses alone after that. I think it's also very likely that after this little ordeal, Zipporah and Moses' sons backed up and went back to Midian, and Moses traveled on alone to Egypt. Meanwhile, moving on to verse 27, the Lord said to Aaron, "Go into the desert and meet Moses." So he met Moses at the mountain of God and kissed him. Then Moses told Aaron everything the Lord had sent him to say, and also about all the miraculous signs he had commanded him to perform. Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshipped. It would seem to me, from these final verses of chapter 4, that God definitely got Moses' attention. Even Aaron obeyed when God told him to leave Egypt and go meet his brother. He left and he met Moses. They rendezvoused on that same mountain where God had initially spoke to Moses. After a traditional greeting, Moses obediently told Aaron everything that God had told him, showed him, or even told him about all the miraculous signs that God was going to do in Egypt. When they got there, when they arrived in Egypt, they very promptly called all the elders of the Israelites together. They're continually walking in obedience to what God had told them, both of them, to do. They called the elders together. It says Aaron told them everything that he was told to tell them. Moses did the signs, all the miraculous signs that God had told him to give. And as God had also told him, they believed. They believed that he truly had come from God. Of course, when the leaders realized Plus, God speaks to us individually every day. He's always giving us marching orders. How good are you at obeying His commands and His instructions? Tragically, I think there has been a shift in recent years in our culture and even certainly in the church in America. Perhaps it's in an effort to kind of balance out an overemphasis on the law and legalism. I'm not sure what's behind it all. But in recent years, the church has predominantly focused on a message of love and grace. And there's nothing wrong with that, because as our Tuesday morning Bible study, we've been reminded, God is the very embodiment of love. He just doesn't act in loving ways. He is the very embodiment of love. And certainly we can't even begin to fathom the amount of grace that we have received from God. Amen? Each and every day, we receive grace upon grace upon grace from God. So it's not necessarily wrong to preach that message, but if that's all we talk about, and we never talk about the righteous and the justice side of God, and the fact that He calls us to be holy just as He is holy, the result of that is we talk about what Jesus said. We talk about the fact that He said, well, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. We talk about how we're supposed to take up our cross every day and follow Christ. I mean, we talk about those things. We know all those things, and we talk about them. But there's a major difference between talking about the laws and commands of the Lord and living them out. In other words, there's a difference between simply knowing God's commands and applying them to our life on a regular basis. And that was something that Moses was struggling with right here. Though we may be tempted to think so, it's never a small matter to neglect any command of God, regardless of how trivial it may seem to us. If you're not sure what obedience looks like, then I encourage you to look at Christ. Think about Him when you're thinking about obedience. John 5:19, Jesus said, the Son can do nothing by Himself. He can only do what He sees His Father doing. And whatever the Father does, the Son does. A little later, chapter 8, verse 28, Jesus said, I do nothing on my own, but I speak just what the Father has taught me to speak. Jesus walked in complete obedience to God each and every day. He humbled Himself and became obedient even to death on a cross for you and for me. In other words, Jesus gave it all for us. How can we claim Jesus as our Savior if we're not willing to obey Him in all things, both the important as well as in those things that the world might consider to be rather trivial? May it never, ever be said of you or I that we are guilty of being a person who says, Jesus, save me, but stay out of my life. When Jesus comes, may He find you being obedient. Let's pray. Father God, we do thank you and praise you again for your great love for us. Lord, I thank you for this reminder from your word, from the life of Moses, about the importance of obedience. And yes, I confess, as I read this, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me that you would kill Moses just because he didn't circumcise his son. But obviously, it was a command from you, and we know that everything from you is important. So help us to never, ever take your commands for granted. Father God, help us. Through the working of your Spirit, Lord, help us to take a personal inventory of our lives, to make sure that we are walking in obedience to you in all areas, not just certain areas, not just the ones that are convenient to us, but in every area of life. And Father, I confess, there's a lot of your commands that I don't like. I'm just going to say it. Lord, they're hard. For example, I don't like to love my enemies. I don't like to love those people who don't like me. That's just one right there, Lord. But you command us to do that. But I also thank you, Lord, that you don't expect us to do it on our own, Lord. You've given us your Spirit to help us. Help us, give us the strength and even the desire to walk in obedience to you. So today our prayer is that you would help us to be obedient. Lord, we truly in our heart, Lord, when you return, we want you to find us being faithful to you. Help us to be faithful each and every day, not just on Sunday mornings, not just when we're with our family or wherever we are, Lord. Help us to be faithful everywhere. And Lord, again, give us that desire. Help us also to realize that nothing that should instruct us